you. So I'm Roy Bahat, and I run a company called IGN, which is a media company that, believe it or not, is all about games. So we have 50 million people who come every month to learn about what's going on in the world of games. And I've got here some of the most knowledgeable voices about the intersection of games in Israel and games period, so we can have a conversation about it. But just kind of first, before I introduce, by a show of hands, how many people here have played a game in the last 24 hours on a cell phone? Okay, I know that some of you are not telling the truth, because if I ask about Angry Birds, more hands will definitely go up. How many people, just curious if there's even one, would consider games the #1 form of entertainment in your life? Okay, one. Really? No, I'm teasing. But if you are under the age of 35 and male, statistically speaking, games are the #1 form of entertainment in your life, more likely than any other game. I'm not going to ask you your age. And if you're under 25 and either male or female, games are the #1 form of entertainment. So this is the future wave of how people are going to spend their time, and an exciting opportunity for Israel. We'll talk more about it. Ross Avner runs Yahoo Games, not to be confused with the other Ross who now runs Yahoo. The important Ross is here with us. Shaul Olmert, longtime games entrepreneur, created a company called GameGround, which is a social application system that connects different game experiences across multiple games, venture-backed company, and finger in many places in the games world. Itzik Ben-Basat, who is the chief of staff at Blizzard Entertainment, which is one of the leading creators of big game franchises that are global hits. World of Warcraft, StarCraft, which we were just talking about, which is a game that is actually the #2 sport in Korea after soccer. People will actually go and watch two other people play video games, believe it or not. It's coming here. And Jonathan Epstein, who is the head of OMEC Interactive, a software company that does gesture-based controls, has brought many Israeli companies and game companies to the United States, is also now the chairman of Electrified Games, a game developer. We were joking earlier as to why one of the technology areas, and actually maybe this is a good way to start the conversation, is technology areas where Israel is very involved in games. Gesture-based technologies, where you make a motion with your hands or your body and it's recognized by what's on the screen, something like what Xbox has done with their Kinect system, which has sold almost 20 million units, is something that was really pioneered in Israel, maybe because we like to gesture a lot, I don't know. But maybe we can open with that on kind of maybe what are some of the ways in which Israel does play in the game space? What happens in Israel with games?
Well, I'll start with the gesture viewpoint. As you pointed out, Israel has emerged very much as the center of gesture technologies. There are some of the leading hardware companies there, companies like PrimeSense, Envision, which was bought by Intel, software companies like OMEC, people that work with 3D cameras, and there's some great 2D gesture companies as well. iSight, I think, is here today, PointGrab, XTR, and others. Originally thought to have originated out of research at the Technion and work in the military. Gesture can be used for so many things, but like so many new technologies, gaming is the first point of entry into the consumer mainstream. If you look at optical drives or sound on computers or 3D graphics, all these things we take for granted. So I think, however that emerged, Israel is the center of gesture, and gesture technologies and natural user interfaces are revolutionizing the nature of gaming, initially in the living room, but soon in tablets and PCs through some of the new close-range gesture technologies. And we're also starting to see studios. I think some of the leading studios building gesture games, companies like Sidekick, are also based in Israel.
So there's some technology companies. Is anybody making games in Israel?
Well, Sidekick, I think they have some representatives here, is one of them. There's some other studios. Funtactics is a big studio, but these other guys might know better.
Sure, no, I mean, obviously there are a bunch, and this trend is growing. So Israel is not necessarily the global capital of the gaming world yet, but things are definitely emerging. And I think the entry point is technology. So the technological and entrepreneurship environment, the entrepreneurial environment in Israel have definitely seeded a couple of companies that are into that are trying to penetrate into the games market. So it could be, whether it's by gestures or companies like Overwolf that are developing technology solution to be integrated in games. And that's obviously the niche or the point in which Israel can bring its strengths into the global gaming community. But I think that, you know, the gamers in Israel, those teenager and young adults that play games all day, for which games is the primary form of entertainment, you know, they don't want to be technologists. They want to create games. They want to create content. And I think we'll see more and more of that. You know, I'd be curious to hear from Ross's experience. How many developers does he see? Does he take content for Yahoo that don't necessarily reside in the US or in English-speaking countries? And I think Israel shouldn't be different, shouldn't be more culturally departed than any of those other countries as well. And I think that you know, we'll see more and more entrepreneurs in Israel trying to create content, and eventually we'll get there because you know, when we grew up in Israel as kids, we had zero exposure to global corporate culture. We had one television channel that was owned by the government. We had, you know, no access to anything. Today, kids and young adults that are growing up in Israel are exposed to the same cultural influence. They are, you know, in a way growing in the same cultural environment as kids in the US or anywhere else. So I think it's only natural that they'll be able to produce content that is equally relevant to those markets as well.
Yeah, and I'd love to address that because I would love to see more content coming out of Israel that sites like Yahoo could actually distribute. And just by example, we've done business with Israeli companies before, and typically it always emerges in the technology sector. So we've done, for example, in-game advertising, technology partners, and things like that. But if we go back a step, just 1 second, you know, what's interesting about games is that game historians will tell you that a hit game typically comes out with some cultural aspect of it. So there was a very interesting article recently by Sam Anderson of the New York Times who talked about how if you look at Monopoly, Monopoly was a board game that came up out of 1930s, right during the Depression. Everybody got a chance to be a tycoon. In the 50s, we had Risk during the Cold War. In the 60s, we had Twister, which was probably more along the lines of the 1960s sexual revolution. Nowadays, we have Angry Birds, and everybody can infer, well, why Angry Birds? A lot of it has to do with the game mechanics that are available to us, but you can also say it's a social commentary on the 99% who want to kill the pigs on Wall Street. I don't know. My point is that as technology evolves, Israel being one of the central points in the world for exporting technology, it is very likely that we can expect to see much more exciting and interesting things coming out of Israel, and it's also going to be square in the middle of content.
You know, so by the way, I just want to remind you on your Wall Street comment, this is all on the record, so you may live to regret that one. But it's, you know, one of the things that's unique about Blizzard is making franchises that do serve kind of a global culture. To what extent do you see games as something that different countries have different preferences on versus a hit is something that is loved around the world?
Actually, I was listening to what the other people on the panel said, and what kind of goes through my mind when I think about Israel as a place that games will be developed in one day, is that the Jewish people have always been good storytellers. And we can see it already in TV where the market has evolved to the point that Israeli TV shows are being sold to the US. So I see no reason for Israel not to be a center for game development because games are a lot about storytelling, about creating that immersive experience that part of it is story.
Well, so I think that's an interesting question because it raises a balance between, you know, there's a kind of game that is like an immersive film where you play along with a deeply immersive story, but then there's very popular games like Angry Birds that can emerge in a moment, maybe are not necessarily as storytelling driven. And I'm just curious how you guys think about what's the balance of power between these kind of bigger game experiences and something that's a little more immediate and quick, or is that not the right even way to think about it?
No, it's totally, but again, I'm doing the analogy to other forms of entertainment, for example, TV, where you have HBO that creates a very immersive and unique kind of experience when you watch their shows. They're always high quality. You always kind of like really getting into the story that they're trying to tell. And they're less focused on the light entertainment TV shows that ABC or NBC will create. Doesn't mean that they make less money. So I think that we're getting back to the basic of how much value are you providing to the consumer in the entertainment that you're providing. The company I work for is focusing on providing tons of value to consumers, creating great entertainment value, and trying to obviously also profit from that as part of our operation. there is also room for lighter entertainment where, I spend, 5 minutes with a game or 10 minutes with a game. There isn't really a story behind it, but the mechanics feels great. I think there is less consumer value in those businesses. I'll give you an example. Angry Birds that everyone talked about made $100 million last year. Our sister company, Activision, they have a brand called Skylander that probably most people didn't hear about, but it made twice the money last year. So I think that there is less money in casual entertainment. There is more money where you provide real valuable experiences.
Okay, I have good news for everybody. We have our first disagreement of the day, which is great. So I beg to differ. I think that where the world is going is much towards what you call light entertainment, and I want to support that by some evidences. I think that the consumption habits of users in today's prominent gaming platform, which are tablets and smartphones, is very different. So yeah, Blizzard does still exist and as strong as ever, and still creates massive IPs, which takes 20 years to develop. How long was Diablo 3 developed?
12 years.
12 years to develop with massive investment, and they do better than any other game franchise by all the intents and purposes. At the same time, what consumers are getting used to these days is to a new, what we call app economy. Now it's all about getting some app resident on your smartphone or tablet, play it for a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, and then move on to a different one. And the only investment you'll ever need to make is, approximately 99 cents, and everybody's happy with it. So, there are always going to be epic productions like Blizzard's, but I think the majority, the people in the room, few of them have raised their hands to say if they played any game. Fewer of them would have raised their hands, than if we asked if they, you do?
But yeah, I do.
I'm sure I can come up with some other argument then.
It's always been like that. There were always games that were launched and people played them for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and that's it. Those games made less money. The only point that I'm making here is not that lighter entertainment is not in demand. It is in demand, but the likelihood of generating more revenues in lighter entertainment than deeper experiences is slim.
Yeah,
Don't look at it by title because it's a much more fragmented market. There are so many IPs that were created along 12 years.
Why are we
so many that,
these are both different and valid business models. If you're going to compare to movies and TV, the biggest grossing entertainment properties are the highest budget ones, but it does require a different sort of capitalization. So I don't think that's where Israel's not going to play in big budget console games. I'd love to bring us a little back to what's going to get the game industry going in Israel, if I might, because I've been doing business in Israel for 8 years now. And when I first arrived, I'd come out of the games and game-related businesses. I was very convinced that gaming would never happen in Israel. That brilliant technical people, not the best marketers, sort of these stereotypes. That
And now?
Well, I think so. What's changed? A couple things have changed. One is that for certain types of games, the barrier to entry has lowered. You can be smaller and more nimble in smaller teams, and you can get that kind of capital. The second one is the human capital. If you look at where gaming is centered in the U.S., it's where gaming started in the U.S. So it's like Seattle, Southern California, San Francisco, Austin, and all these studios came out of some of these original big companies. That didn't happen in Israel. But people are moving back. You moved back. You moved back and forth, right? So there's a lot of Israelis came to the U.S. and are now poised to move back. And it's not just about storytelling. It's also about the means of production. And then finally, I think every time technology shifts, smart TVs, gesture, whatever it is, that creates an opportunity that is sort of caters to the Israeli skills and sensibilities.
So maybe we can get a little more specific on it, on what the opportunity is right now. So if you were, and some of you have recently done this, but you're starting a game company tomorrow, and somebody's willing to make an investment and create a team to go do something, where are you putting your bets?
I think you still look at it from a platform standpoint, at least initially. I think by the sheer design of what's going on in the marketplace right now. So in the last 3 to 5 years, the technology shift has been the mobile phone, or more specifically the smartphone. Today, you have more people with cell phones on them than you have people in the world brushing their teeth. True statistic, I'm not kidding you about that. And so with the smartphone, it suddenly opened up a whole new opportunity for digital gamers, or what we used to call casual gamers. The hardcore gamers who play World of Warcraft or Call of Duty, they are not going away. They're going to continue to consume. Those are going to be big production budgets. But what the smartphone has enabled is for independent developers to bring in content and innovate and do different things.
I think one of the interesting questions about that is today we have that app economy on smartphones. It's a very tempting place to get started because it's easy. Less revenue, but it's also much less expensive to produce, so it can be profitable. You know, I was struck reading earlier this week something that Tim Cook said, you know, one of his first major public appearances as the head of the app economy, basically. And, you know, he said Apple is deep into gaming, that more people buy an iPod Touch for gaming than for music, which is a stunning thing for the CEO of the most valuable company in the world to say, and then started talking about Apple TV. And so I'm curious, kind of, to what extent do you think that lighter experience may soon come to a television set near you? And, you know, and maybe to riff a little bit on Apple's future in gaming.
I think first of all, it's interesting because Steve Jobs was totally against games.
Against it.
So it's already an interesting comment made by, you know, such a powerful person that is going to bring entertainment to TV in a different way than we know. But exactly on that point, I think that what's most interesting to me is that there are so many tools, development tools out there today that allows you to go cross-platform and with a very, very low budget. I mean, companies like Unity, a game development tool that was developed in Sweden, now based here in the Valley. But basically it allows to someone that sits in his mom's basement to sit down and develop a game and develop a good enough experience and sell it on multiple platforms in a pretty easy way. And if you ask me where I think the most, you know, the first great game from Israel would come, it's actually from that person. That person that go and learns how to develop on Unity, very simple, each one of us can do that actually, and develop a great game experience that kind of catches up virally on the internet, on the iPhone, on other platforms.
So that's what you would be betting on, is games made, you know, by individual experimenters on multiple platforms.
Actually, when you look at entertainment in general, even in big companies, you see that there is always 1, 2, 3 main people that are driving that franchise, that are driving that idea. They have the concept of how the game should look like. And that's the reason I think that with the current development tools, with the low budgets, with the low cost of entry, you know, we're likely to see someone that has some genius ideas on a great experience that will develop that.
Is it more like, I mean, on that, you know, love different perspectives on it, is making a game and thinking about investing in games, is it more like investing in a work of art or more like investing in a business?
No, I think it's a real business, and you know, as opposed to my educated colleagues here, I'm the only one who lives in Israel right now, and I can tell you, you know, some good news. There are a lot of new gaming companies in Israel, and we are beginning to develop an ecosystem that is not yet as large.
What are some that you're really excited about?
I'm really excited about what Fantactics is doing in
What
brand
is
entertainment. Fantactics is a studio that evolved over the past 6 years since they established themselves, and are now creating branded social games for major movie studios. So they created the social games for brands like Mission Impossible and the Hunger Games. I'm excited about a company like Playtika that now employs hundreds of people in Israel and was acquired by a casino company for more than $100 million. So we are beginning to develop an ecosystem. We have now thousands of people in Israel that are working in games which never existed before. And yes, we are not nearly the size and the magnitude of the security software industry in Israel or the chip design. But you know, those didn't evolve overnight as well. Those things take time, and whether it takes 5 years or 10 years until Israel is considered as a legitimate player in the global games market, I don't know. But I'm sure it's I'm sure it's happening because I've been there 5 years ago when there was nothing, and I'm seeing how today there's something, and it goes in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that I think Jonathan made earlier about games is a window into many emerging technologies is relevant to that as well, where when you have the average age at which somebody begins to learn to make these things is 13.4, average age when somebody learns to program. Their number one thing they love in life is likely to be a game. That's likely to be the thing that they begin experimenting on. And if they're part of the same global culture, the idea that they'll have the sensibilities to make a global hit, as has begun to happen in television, no reason it shouldn't happen in games as well.
And also, Roy, there's the thing about Israel being the startup nation. So when we talk about the startup nation, games have always been the playing ground of early adopters, of people who are creative and innovative, and we've got a lot of that in Israel. So those people, they speak English in a funny accent. They have been.
I don't hear any accent. What do you mean?
No, of course not. I'm not a typical Israeli. And they have been immersed in, to some extent, different culture than their peers worldwide. But those things are evolving and changing. And I think eventually this creativity and entrepreneurial spirit of Israelis will find its way into games as well.
This all sounds brilliant and beautiful, but what are the problems with it? I mean, what needs to be overcome to make that dream a reality?
You can address it on many levels. I think there's not much government support. We can always look at Canada as a model for how the Canadian government has identified the potential in video games and essentially created financial incentives for all the major publishers to open studios in Canada, and now they became probably the biggest employer of game developers in the world. We definitely have government support for different kinds of R&D and technology development, but not so much for games. So government support would do well, and I think will be proven as a good investment for the country long run. And in general, as I said, it's just a matter of time. It's it's an ecosystem in development, and we are still in early stage. But you know what? We're no longer in infancy. It's beginning to shape up. And when we'll all meet here again in 5 years from now, I think the nature of the conversation will be entirely different.
That's great. And do you see on Yahoo Israeli game developers aspiring to create and publish content, or not yet?
I mean, I don't see it today.
How many Israeli games have you bought for Yahoo Games?
None so far. So
It's a very low number.
It's
now.
a very low number, and I apologize personally
Yeah,
for that.
that's good.
But what the point that I want to kind of make to maybe wrap up this piece of the conversation.
Yeah, and then maybe we'll take some questions from the audience. Yeah.
Is that I do think it's going to happen. I do think it's just a matter of time. I think that one of the important ingredients of why it's going to happen is because now there is a business to consumer opportunity that was never before. So in the past, Israelis had to depend on other businesses to reach consumers. But today, when you can develop to, let's say, the iOS store, which in the future could be the Apple TV, then you no longer are dependent. It's really a level playing field of who can create the best content. And if we can get that in Israel, then some of these companies are going to be very successful and could be the next Angry Birds.
And by the way, online performance marketing is one area in which Israel is the global capital of the world.
No question.
Starting from the gambling companies and with other areas like like porn and others that were very popular in Israel. That grew a generation of people that really know how to do online marketing very, very efficiently. And when some of them will start marketing games, we'll see much more success in that as well.
Yeah,
We know nothing about that in
very
Of course,
believable. All of this
but
is on
just
the
to say,
record. I just wanna remind
Playtika, for instance, the founders came from gambling companies and they
Sure.
knew how to, to do performance marketing. And when they created great content, they knew how to bring it to market.
Yeah, and I think this general point of kind of new ideas being developed, cultural ideas or technological ideas being pioneered in games. I mean, ICQ is instant messaging, but really, instant messaging is a technology that first arrived in games. Three-dimensional graphics first arrived in games. The best uses of a touch screen interface first arrived in games, and I think we'll probably see more of it. And so now I think we're ready to hear your questions.
What do you think the role of 3D is in some of these mobile games? It depends on the platform, but are people doing more in 3D for gaming?
3D.
Small, 3D.
Yeah.
Small.
The question is 3D on a small screen, and maybe some of the context there that might be helpful is Nintendo released a handheld device, which is a gaming platform that is 3D with no glasses required. It's, I don't know, you guys can tell me how it's done.
Success.
Moderate success. And so does 3D and 3D on mobile have a future in games?
When the product is going to be good. I think.
So is that like, does teleportation have a future in personal travel? You'll say when the product is going to be good?
Yeah, I think it's all about product at the end of the day. I mean, the experience is just not great, not seamless enough for it to be massively successful. I think it's just a question of time. Maybe a company from Israel that can develop something that provides a seamless experience, 3D experience. When you actually get a very good 3D experience, it's so much more immersive and so much fun. It's just that most consumers are not willing to go through the hassle of getting to that experience with either glasses or not a perfect experience on a small screen. So it's just about creating a great product, just a question of time.
Two questions. One, what does the panel think about the recent case with Google and Oracle with Java, the programming language, the case, and how will that affect future development?
So the question is what, and please feel free to say I have no idea, which is what is the effect of the Google-Oracle battle over the IP around Android and Java, basically, which is Google's app platform. And will it affect the gaming business? I have no idea.
What you said.
Okay, anybody have an idea? I don't think we know. Wrong crowd. Second question.
Those two. One was that.
Oh, those were the two questions? We don't know on either one. Okay, sorry. This is, by the way, very rare for an Israeli crowd, is we just acknowledged not knowing something and did not provide you with any opinions. No opinions were provided.
I have two boys at home, so a lot of gaming hours. They play Warcraft and Angry Birds and Infinity Blade. What they do now, though, is mainly Minecraft. And I think the reason they're so excited about it is because of all these crowdsourced mods that they can constantly be incorporating into their games. So what are the gaming companies think of that?
Yep.
Yeah, so I just want to provide some explanation of the question before we get the answer, which is, you're saying your sons are playing a game called Minecraft, which is a unique phenomenon because it was really created by one guy working on his own in Sweden, an experienced game developer, but really working on his own, offered the game for direct download on his website for, I don't know, 30 euro or something like that, and then bam, it really became a global phenomenon, and part of what's fueled it is that individuals who play the game can also modify the game by creating additional settings or worlds for themselves and their friends, and it's become almost like, imagine digital Lego that's played on a PC.
First of all, Blizzard has been providing great tools for users to change our games for the past 15 years. And actually, our biggest competitors in one of the fields is a competitor that kind of was generated by our own tools. And we welcome that. We look at that and we want to create, we want to spark creativity within our users and allow them to kind of create their own interpretation of our IP. We think it's awesome. We've always done that. I think the interesting thing is that no matter how easy the tools are, you still see that the number of people that actually go through the hassle of creating something is relatively low.
It's relatively low, if you look at it in relative to the number of gamers, but a game like World of Goo or Little Big Planet, a
Awesome.
PlayStation game had 6 million user-generated levels. And I think, UGC is just one of the things that, to your earlier point, Roy, that's one of the things that emerged in games and then became a cultural phenomenon. So that existed in games, much like e-commerce, auctions, leaderboards, chat, and so many other things before they became mainstream activities. So, I think that's what Minecraft is doing is really a natural evolution of something that always existed in games and, is now unleashed in a big way.
New things, look like toys before they become mainstream. Maybe one or two last questions, yeah.
What's the ultimate goal of some of these smaller Israeli gaming companies? Do they hope to just sell, have one hit and then sell for $100 million? Do they really just enjoy what they are doing, or do they want to try to create like a really large studio?
No, I think reality is that it's there are hardly global companies that can really serve the global consumer market from Israel long run. So the more natural evolution these days will be to build something, get a proof of concept that's solid enough in order for the company to be acquired by a larger company with more resources, or potentially move a large part of the operation outside of Israel. But again, maybe that will change over time as well.
Yeah, and I mean, the only thing I'd add to that is, games, like any other form of culture, have people who make them for a variety of reasons. Many are economically motivated, but not all. I mean, some may just be doing it for love of the art of what they're creating. And, there's a huge body of people who do that in Israel. And so they may just be doing it because they want to see their game exist. The same way a filmmaker or a musician might want to see their product exist. Last question, yes?
What is the future, if any, and what kind of demographics have you looked at as Israeli companies for educational games across the board?
The future of educational games. I don't know, educational games. Are you thinking of any specific Israeli companies that do?
Just a different twist in terms of the market demographic for moms, for instance, who have the iPhone for the 2-year-old and the 3-year-old and or whatever, keep them quiet in the car, I'm just interested in the statistics if you did it.
Well,
Well, you know, in general, I think that the way we kind of think of education games, there was a term that we used to use a lot. It was called edutainment. And typically, the challenge has been with educational software that is games is that it's really hard to really make an impact from a sales perspective. And that's always been the challenge. Now, that could change because development's now cheaper, so we might start to see educational games that are more compelling and could be used in a variety of applications. For example, there's one company in Israel that's coming up called JoyTunes, and they have a very interesting product that is both a game, but it teaches kids how to play the piano. So these kind of applications today are less expensive to develop, and so they actually have a much better chance than, say, in past years.
Yeah, and I think that as you know, even the word edutainment makes me feel like I'm
Right.
not having fun anymore.
Exactly.
And so it's hard enough to make a game that is fun to play,
Right.
to then add the overlay that you're going to make it explicitly educational, multiplies the challenge. And so instead what we see is games that become educational by accident. You know, Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing was an early example. And Minecraft, you know, Minecraft Teacher is a guy who used Minecraft in order to teach mathematical principles to students. And we'll see more of that emerge accidentally. I mean, IBM did a whole study on how you can learn leadership by running a guild inside of World of Warcraft. You know, it happens, but it doesn't tend to happen by design.
There's definitely not really a market for it, is what I'm hearing.
There is a market. If the game is fun, people will play it, but they won't play it because they're saying to themselves, but maybe I'll learn something if I play this game.
Educational games are right now not exactly the highest selling games in the market, but I think educators will be stupid not to utilize the most popular and engaging form of entertainment in order to teach kids with the tools that they really interact with. You know, the classroom today looks exactly like the classroom that my grandpa went to, a few hundred years ago. Nothing had changed. It's still, textbooks, a blackboard, and a very similar structure. And I think that, the education world needs to figure out that their consumers today, those children, are programmed differently than older generations of consumers and need to use means that they can relate to much easier. When I was running the games department at Nickelodeon, we did a bunch of those educational games. And, I think that the potential we've seen in terms of, what the other people's alluded to, the fact the educational effect they can have is massive, but they're really underutilized by the educational system and by parents.
So content and development is really the key.
Amen.
You have to make it fun. People have to want to play. So I'm getting a lot of looks, and so unfortunately I see there's a couple other questions, but I think I'm going to have to draw it to a close. Thank you. Let's come back in a few years and see where it all is, and thank all of you.